So, Dr. Kinsey, now 8 years later, because the original autopsy concluded that this was likely caused by a hit and run, or was caused by a hit and run accident on the road because the body was found in the road, according to the medical examiner at the time, they're going to conduct a second autopsy. What factors are they going to be specifically targeting or looking into that will tell them something more?
They're going to look at factors other than what was obvious. They're gonna redo this autopsy, and maybe they'll look at it with another lens from a different direction. Let me look at it as this, and if it was actual car versus pedestrian, let's work till we get to that answer instead of maybe starting with that answer.
To Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice. I'm Julie Grant. 19-year-old Stephen Smith was found dead on a rural South Carolina road back in 2015. His death was originally characterized as a hit and run. Now, after Stephen Smith's mother has spent almost 8 years begging and pleading law enforcement to take another look, it's being considered an intentional homicide. And last weekend, Stephen Smith's body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed.
By doing that Freedom of Information Act, I have copies of like the whole investigation, the autopsy, and then I read it and it made no sense. And then I got the photos and I seen how badly he was beaten. That's not a car.
We want a do-over on Stephen Smith. We think that the investigation got it wrong, that it was not a highway fatality, that it was a homicide, that it was committed somewhere else. And that SLED should have been the one that initially investigated this fatality and not the highway department. And so it's our intention to petition through the coroner's office and ultimately the court to get the proper permission to exhume Stephen's body and have an expert who is familiar and has experience in exhuming bodies that have been in the ground for a long period of time and make a determination as to what caused that blunt force trauma.
We would look for all sorts of things actually on the body. For example, we would look for something we call road rash. If you're hit by a car and you're pushed along the pavement or even a dirt road or anything, you're going to have evidence of that on the body. It's going to be bruises, abrasions, things like that.
Stephen has been exhumed from his grave. This is a trying time for the Smith family. This weekend in particular, Stephen's remains were disturbed. He was, in theory, in peace in his grave. And now that he's been exhumed and he's going to have his autopsy be done, this is very trying for Sandy Smith at this time.
Joining me now, two very special guests. They are the leading members of that private investigation team that's looking into what caused the death of Stephen Smith. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michelle DuPre and forensics expert and the owner of Kinsey and Associates, Dr. Kenny Kinsey. Good morning to you both. Boy, oh boy, it's such an honor and a pleasure to speak with you two. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and joining us this morning. And I want to just start out by acknowledging that I know that you cannot share everything with this investigation with us in order to protect the integrity of it. But I want to make a deal with you both right off the top. Would you please tell us everything that you can share with us? Our viewers, our courties are very interested in solving this case, just as you are and as the Smith family is. So that being said, go as far as you can, please, and we'll respect the boundaries, certainly. I want to begin with the questions that you both have, the questions that are most top of mind for you two. You're experts in your respective fields, and many of us have questions in the public, in the media, the family has questions, but for you two, I'm curious, what are the things that you want the answers most to? Dr. DuPre, I'll begin with you, please.
Well, you know, this was stated that it was a motor vehicle accident, and I think Kenny said it very well a few minutes ago. You know, if we start with that and sort of work backwards, let's look at some pertinent negatives. Let's look at some things that we don't find, that we might expect to find in a motor vehicle accident. And let's make what the evidence that we do find from the second autopsy, let's see if it fits the circumstances of the situation.
Certainly. And Dr. Kinsey, let me go to you, please, with the same question. Which questions are at the top of your mind, please?
Thank you, Ms. Julie. The many aspects of the physical evidence at the scene, the clothing, of course, everyone has hit on it, the location. And then I want to I think it's important to figure out how Stephen got there. And I know it sounds as simple as, either he caught a ride or he hitched a ride or he walked. But as I mentioned in other programs, there's many different paths to get to Sandy Run Road. So it's important for me to try and figure out that part. So as Dr. DuPre said, we can layer that evidence and kind of come to an area of understanding of a general theory, and then we work it as far as we work it. And if it doesn't work out or we hit a brick wall, we turn around and we try something else.
Certainly. I want to play a clip where Stephen Smith's mother is talking about that road and how, in her opinion, there was no reason for him to be on that road. Let's take a listen together now.
From the beginning, was it suspicious to you?
Yes.
Why?
Because he wouldn't have been in the road. He had a cell phone in his pocket. It wouldn't be the first time he had to call for somebody, And, but the car was locked. He had his phone and his key in his pocket. But then he left his wallet. So if you're going to go get gas, why would you leave your wallet in the car? And he wouldn't walk. No, he would have walked through the woods. He would not have been in that road.
And this is coming from Mom, arguably the person who knew Stephen Smith better than anyone. Dr. Kinsey, in the crime scene reconstruction that you're doing here, how meaningful is this coming from Mom?
Well, Miss Julie, Mom always knows you best, and we've got to figure that part out. All the nuances and reasons. We don't know what may have been an impediment to Stephen, maybe taking a different path. As Ms. Chanley pointed out in an earlier show, that is some unforgiving wilderness there. And we just got to figure out what path he took. I believe that would aid Dr. DuPre, pathologist and anthropologist, in figuring out how he got there, and they can aid me by figuring out, what the extent of his injuries were. And I think we can come together as a team and we can answer a majority of these questions.
Yes, and speaking of that, that's a perfect segue for me to ask Dr. DuPre. Dr. DuPre, would you kind of walk us through the process of the second autopsy? You were overseeing it, and Attorney Eric Bland told us how you employed two really great people to perform the actual autopsy, a forensic pathologist and then an anthropologist. How did they work together? Describe for us what that was like, please.
Okay, well, they quite often work together, and in this case, the pathologist, of course, performed the autopsy, but because we didn't know what condition the body might be in, we did have a forensic anthropologist who's going to look at the bones, and in this particular case, pay a special attention to the fractures. And, working together to do that, we were actually able to do a complete and thorough second autopsy, including, of course, looking at the particular areas of interest like the fractures.
Dr. DuPre, I read that you noted that you definitely were able to recover evidence from the second autopsy, but that you didn't know if it was necessarily new evidence. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I just mean that we were able to do a complete and thorough autopsy. And in any autopsy, we recover evidence, whether it's, it can't be exactly the same evidence, but it could be very similar evidence. And we were actually able to do that in this case because Stephen was well preserved. Everyone who took care of Stephen from the very beginning to the end was very professional, and it allowed us to do this.
And that's wonderful. I mean, certainly a success right there that the autopsy, the second autopsy, I should say, was successful, and you were able to recover evidence, and hopefully that will lead you in the right direction. Would you kindly stand by, please, Dr. Michelle DuPre and Dr. Kenny Kinsey? We need to squeeze in a break. When we come back, we'll examine more of the evidence and the facts surrounding this tragic case of the death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith.
It's a mystery that's captivated the nation.
This stretches just so beyond what anyone could imagine.
And left a trail of dead bodies.
Lori Vallow Daybell, accused of triple murder, including her 2 youngest children.
You'll hear every dramatic moment with real-time expert analysis.
It's just so hard to know where the truth ends.
The Doomsday Cult Mom Murder Trial. Coverage begins next week after jury selection, only on Court TV.
Maybe.
When they removed his body from the road, and that was about 9:30, I seen me and my daughter and my son, Chris, seen Alex and Randy Murdaugh at the scene. When Joel was at the sheriff's department, him and Stephanie were at the sheriff's department, I was on the phone with Joel, and Joel said, "Hold on, Randy Murdaugh's calling." And so he said, "That was strange." And I said, "What was it?" He said, "Randy Murdaugh called and wants to help with Stephen's investigation."
Still so many unanswered questions surrounding the death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith. Like why some members of the Murdaugh family inserted themselves into the investigation and were at the scene. Well, we now know the investigation was re-energized after police found something while they were probing into the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. What's more, Randy Murdaugh's name appears in an investigative report about who might be responsible for Stephen Smith's death. Apparently, a witness came forward to tell police that his stepson confided in him that a man named Sean Conley was responsible for Stephen's death. He then goes on to say that the reason he was passing this information on to police was because Randy Murdaugh told him to call. Well, that stinks to high heaven, in my opinion. Let me ask our experts if they can speak to this and how this might relate to the investigative work they're doing privately for the family of Stephen Smith. Dr. Michelle DuPre and Dr. Kenny Kinsey on the program this morning. I don't know how far you'll be able to go with this, but I have to ask, how do facts like these play in to what you're trying to do privately in helping to solve this case for the Smith family? Dr. Kenny Kinsey, I'll go to you first on this one, please.
Miss Julie, I can't speak to the specifics with anybody's particular name, but that's great advice from an attorney. If someone has some information that's pertinent to a major investigation, to tell them to please get it to law enforcement. And I'll tell you, other than the forensic evidence collected with the second autopsy and then the data from the original autopsy, this is not going to be solved on a drop of blood. This case is not going to be solved on a tire print or a footprint. This is going to be somebody bringing us that little information that helps tie everything together. So, I mean, not speaking specific names or identity, but I think that's great advice if someone spoke to an attorney and the attorney advised them to bring it forward. I would advise them to bring it forward, and there's a reward out for information. And I would advise anyone to please get in touch with SLED and pass that information on.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, for that reminder, $35,000 reward being offered by the Smith family for information leading to an arrest. We've been putting that out, and hopefully anyone with information will come forward. Dr. DuPre, can we talk about the first autopsy, please? I know you didn't perform it, but have you reviewed it?
I have reviewed it, yes.
Was there anything wrong with the first autopsy, in your opinion?
Well, you have to remember that the autopsy report is an opinion of the pathologist based on their knowledge, skills, and experience. And so this autopsy was the opinion of the pathologist that did it. And it was very professionally done. As far as the results of that autopsy, I really can't speak to that, you know, whether it matched ours or was different from ours or whatever. But it was a professional autopsy.
I know that there was no manner of death listed. It didn't specifically say homicide on there. That was just left undetermined, as a lot of things were with this case.
Well, Undetermined is actually a good manner of death in this case, because as you know, there's only really 5: homicide, suicide, accident, natural, or undetermined. And when we don't have all the information, as in this case, undetermined is appropriate. And that leaves this open so that when new information does come, then we can proceed and perhaps find that manner of death at a later date.
Okay, so that's good for you. Can you tell me, did the forensic pathologist that you enlisted to perform this come to an opinion on cause and manner of death now in this second autopsy?
I'm not really able to speak to that at this point. Again, we are doing everything we can to support this investigation, which SLED is taking the lead on, and that information will become available, when it's appropriate.
Sure. Well, and I think that's a good point for discussion, because I think it can be confusing. You all have been enlisted to help out privately the Smith family, who it has been begging and pleading for answers, and they are so deserving of that, as you both know. But SLED also never closed this case. It's always remained open. It kind of was just reinvigorated when something was learned about the Smith death that came from investigating the Murdaugh murders. And maybe one day soon we'll know what that is, who knows. But I guess, are your investigations running parallel? Is that a way you could say it? Or are you all working together? Kind of explain to us how it's working, Dr. DuPre.
Dr. Kinsey, I'm going to throw that to you, because you said that so eloquently the other day.
Please, that would be great. I thought you wanted to answer that, so I went to you. Yeah, Dr. Kinsey, please.
Our parallel investigation, Ms. Julie, is to verify and supplement. And if we come across something that is law enforcement worthy that will help the criminal investigation, it comes first. And we stop and we pass that on to Mr. Bland, Mr. Richter, and definitely the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. We don't want to do anything that's going to discredit the integrity of their case. And there's certain things that they know that they can't share with us, and I understand that. It's certain things they shouldn't share with us if they want it to be independent. So we're supplementing and verifying original information, and with the addition of the second autopsy with Dr. DuPre and her colleagues, we're just running. It's a parallel investigation, but any minute, any second, and we've already passed on a lot of information. Anytime we come across something that we think will aid them in their prosecution of any type crime associated with Mr. Smith's death, we put on the brakes and we get that information to them.
And that's fantastic. We just have about a minute left. Is there anything else you would like our viewers to know? You mentioned passing along information, but anything else, to that end, please?
I do think somebody out there knows something. And again, as you said, I just encourage them to come forward and come forward now.
I appreciate it. Dr. Kinsey.
It's not the natural progression to bury your child, but when these things happen, the Smith family deserves answers. And as has been mentioned, somebody, just a little bit of information, get it to us, get it to SLED, use the hotline, the email, and give this family some answers.
Exactly. It could even be anonymous. Yes. A great note to end on. Boy, thank you both. Dr. Kenny Kinsey, Dr. Michelle DuPre, thank you kindly. We'll look forward to speaking again soon.